A photo is just a photo, right? Well, not always. Welcome to the Is That Really Photography podcast, where we investigate and celebrate the lesser known aspects of photography, photographic art, and the fun which can be had when you step away from the mainstream. I'm Mara Robinson, and today we're exploring the language of photography, working with the community, and attracting some unwanted attention from the police with photographic artist Jo Howell on episode 2 of the Is This Really Photography podcast. Jo, welcome to the podcast. Could you start by giving us a brief introduction to who you are and what it is that you do?
So I'm Jo Howell and I'm a photographic artist. And by photographic artist, I just mean that I use photography in lots of different formats to create artworks. I also work a lot with participation and community groups using analog photography and alternative processes to teach people about light and also about the language of photography. And I find that analog tends to give us a bit of a mechanical way of describing what's going on in the camera, which is a little bit similar than trying to get your head around digital.
You've mentioned using the analog processes and the mechanical, physical aspect of it. Which processes do you work with, and which ones are your preferred ones?
I like working with a lot of different processes. I think it's good to be adaptive depending on who you're working with and what the situation is. For example, if I'm going out with a group and we're maybe taking in the beach and the coastal environment, then I might encourage them to take pinhole cameras with them, single shot, you've only got one, just use it carefully, or collecting little objects for photograms or photographing on their smartphones to then use in a Polaroid lab later on. So I'm always trying to think about different ways that we can take photography, which is quite often screen-based, and make it into something physical that you can put your hands on and consider in a different way.
I know you live near the coast, obviously using the beaches and everything. So how do people react to that? This idea, I'm going on a photography workshop and then I'm being taken to the beach and I'm told I've got this pinhole thing and I get one shot. And, how do people react to that?
People seem to be all game for it because it's so unusual. People can get used to learning in a very regular format, school learning, university learning. We're sitting, conversing with a teacher, whereas I'm like, let's go out and have a practical experience. You can't really make art or photography if you're always just indoors. So as often as possible, I try to make it experiential so that they can just take that exact moment for the creation of art. So with purpose, that gives them the chance to work within a parameter, but also because it's a very loose parameter. All right, this is your experience down the beach. Can you think about the environment? They can come away with loads of different ideas. So I think experiencing the real world and being able to put that back into a piece of artwork is a really good way to show people that art isn't a classroom-based thing. It's got a life of its own.
I know you also talk a lot about the language of photography. How do they link in with each other? So, we've gone down the beach or whatever, and I've got these objects and I'm going to make photograms, or I've got my little pinhole camera. How does that link in with the language of photography? And how do you link that in with your audience? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So quite often I'll have a good 20 minutes to half an hour of just telling people what they're going to be doing. Because you've got to imagine that, loads of people have not really done anything like this. Oh, what do you mean? We're going to take a little bistro tin down the beach. So I have to give them an explanation and sometimes a demonstration depending on the age level before we go out. So that tells them the mechanics of light and what's actually happening with the process that they're exploring. But as a side note to that, obviously I ask them what they think a photograph is. And that gets the conversation going, because they'll say, oh, well, it's something my mum's taken on her phone, or what was the other one? It's portraits, it's selfies. And it's good to see what the kids or adults think that photography is, to then be able to say, right, so do you think that composition is important? Do you think focus is important? The way that things are seen by different cameras is something to think about, because it's not the same as your eyes. It changes depending on what you're using. So in the case of pinhole photography, it's super wide angle. It's like taking in the whole universe. So you tell that to the kids and show them, or adults. I keep saying kids because because they tend to have so much enthusiasm. It's infectious, because they really haven't seen anything like this before. Adults will see it and they'll be like, oh, I've got a memory of this. My uncle used to have a dark room under the stairs, or what have you. But yeah, so when you tell them that it's really wide angle and explain what that is, then you get them doing really weird things, like lying on the floor right next to this Bisto tin on the beach.
I'm assuming you've had that happen. You've had kids lying on the beach with Bisto tins.
Loads of things, and you just think for a second, like, this is really surreal.
Am I right that you use all sorts of things to make the pinhole cameras as well?
Yeah, biggest camera that I took out with a group from Hendon was a microwave box. So it's like a big box boat, and I'm like hoiking it down to the river. It was a good like half a mile from the dark room to the river to go and photograph a HMS warship. The river police come past and said, "What you did?" And I was like, "Oh, we're just taking a picture." What you mean you're taking a picture? Well, this box is a camera. All right, because it looks really weird, and we thought that there might have been a terrorist problem. HMS Ocean, maybe. It was a really big one down in Hendon. Quite often, weird photography can draw a lot of attention, and sometimes, I guess, not for the right reasons.
That's not the only run-in you've had with the local police. Potential terrorism, is it?
I know. So I think I just like to push the boundaries just to see how far the local constabulary can take it. So yeah, in 2018, I had a commission to go out and teach people in Sunderland these different forms of photography, and to help them to think about the place that photography has in their lives. And as part of this, we were going to make solograph cans, which are essentially little tin of pop with a hole in and a piece of photographic paper in the back, and just leave them for as long as you want. And then we tend to just scan the image, so it's a transient thing. We scan the image and then pop it around the right way, and what you can see is like the arcs of the sun as it moves across the sky for however long you've had the camera in position. So these kids, I was like, everybody drink your pop. So they're all high as kites anyway, off all the sugar. And then we went round from Chester Road near the hospital up to like the graveyard area, putting up these little tins. All of these pop cans had little stickers on saying, "Science project, this is a camera, do not touch." And we've gone out and put out about 12 of them in different places, and luckily I'd Google pinned exactly where everything was, because after the workshop I got back home and I had a panicked phone call saying, "You need to come and get all of the tins back down, because the police are here and they've had a phone call worrying about terrorists and suspect packages that have been left all over the town." So I was like, what? They've got stickers on, man, that say they're children's science things. And then the policeman came on the phone and he was like, yeah, but either you have to come and get them, or we're going to have to go and find them all, and we'll have to treat them like suspect packages. So it would be a lot easier if you just go and get them. So I had to go back, collect them all, and then we took them back to the youth workshop where I'd been, and we just put them up on the back of like private property, essentially. So the police weren't bothered, but they'd also had like obviously a brief introduction by that point, so they knew what was going on.
I would imagine the kids actually absolutely loved that. they'd caused a stir. I'd like to come back to the language of photography because we're talking a little bit about the mechanics. And I know that you use this in part to talk about the language of photography, how it exists in the modern world, and how understanding that can benefit us as individuals to avoid certain pitfalls.
Yeah, let's open that can of worms. So yeah, so photography is a language, and I quite often will open sessions, especially if I've got a good run of time with people. We can get into the nitty gritty. What we can move beyond, as you said, like the technical, mechanical side of things, to think about how that works to an audience, how we read those technical aspects of an image. So what I mean is how we can use composition to create a story or a narrative, and how you can use focus in images to highlight the important parts of the frame. The main thing that people need to learn is that nothing is in the viewfinder or the photograph by accident. Everything should be there intentionally. Now, obviously, there are a lot of great serendipitous moments that can happen with photography, but put that aside, right? And don't pin all your hopes up on chance. Know what a good photograph is and kind of go to where you think that will happen and frame it up and consider what's in that frame and what you're focusing on. So I might take people on a photo walk and I'll always say, get in close. You know, like there's a really big wide world. You need to get in close to the things that you want people to look at so that they know exactly what you want to talk about when you're showing them the picture. Because even that simple thing to us as photographers, if you haven't been taught that, then you just don't know it. So I've had loads of people where they'd be like, clickety, clickety, clickety. And you'd be like, well, what are you taking a photograph of? Well, I'm just taking a photograph of the scene. What about the scene? What are you showing us? What are you telling us? Oh, I don't know. I was just going to like have a look afterwards and then zoom in. And when you hear things like that, you just, because it's off, that it's really bad. But very simple, very basic lesson, right? Everything in that view, in that rectangle, is there for a reason. Use your focus carefully and get in close. Boom. You've become a better photographer just by those 3 rules. That language is important because if you don't realize that everybody else is being, you know, very careful about what they're putting in the frame and the reasons why, then you can kind of go along in this bubble, not realizing that all of the photographs around you have a purpose and a need to fill that you're not necessarily aware of unless you break it down and have a little think about it. So we learn that at university because obviously in order to put it into practice, you have to understand the language of photography. But yeah, really getting your head around those, like that very a simple concept that nothing's there by accident makes this really very complex world far more interesting, I think, because rather than just skimming along the surface, you can get into the photographer, the advertising agency, the politician's propaganda, you know, whatever, and you can understand that from their point of view and what they're trying to achieve with it.
I think that's so important because when I think back to when I was young, you know, many years ago, and we had TV and we had magazines and movies, and there'd be, you know, billboards and stuff like that. We didn't have the internet. Now people, especially youngsters, they're just bombarded all the time by imagery. And I think opening their eyes to the fact that this imagery is very much created with purpose and intent, I think that's such an important thing for people to understand, and then to take that information and do with it whatever it is that they feel is appropriate for themselves. But like I say, very important, especially I think with the youth that I know you work with a lot. We've talked a lot about how you're exposing people who perhaps are not young enough to have any sort of memory of this type of photography with the analog, etc. None of us are young enough to remember some of the really old processes from when they were in their heyday. But how does all of this fit in with your life, and how does this fit in with your growth as a photographic artist? Because I know you do have some challenges of your own to deal with.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important that people realise we're not all fit as fiddles.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be a creative. It just means that you have to be a creative in the way that's best for you. So I've got fibromyalgia, it's a very bizarre, everything's wrong kind of illness. So I get a lot of fatigue and I get a lot of all over body pain. And working long hours and standing and getting up and down with my camera and things like that can be extremely tiring and can cause us to have a flare that puts us to bed for a few days. So I guess when I first left university, I had absolutely no intention whatsoever of becoming a wedding photographer or anything like that. I did a couple of them. And this was even before I got particularly poorly. I realised that there's a lot of hard work and there's only one chance to get things right because it's that special day event. So realistically, I was like, if I was to do wedding photography, it wouldn't just be me. I'd have to take a second shooter, possibly a third shooter. Do you know what I mean? It becomes this bigger thing. And it's also like 12 hours on your feet exhaustion. So I was like, that's just not for me. Somebody else can do that for sure. Because I work a lot with participants and a lot of different disadvantaged groups, I think it probably helps the fact that I can really have empathy with other people and how they're feeling. And hopefully I can do that in a positive way. Basically, life's going to chuck stuff at you, right? You might not be born disabled, but apparently like 75% of us will eventually get age-related disabilities. So it's good to have empathy and to give people a chance to be creative in their terms. So quite often I'll be like, right, well, I'll do a lot of cyanotype because it's got natural rest like points. So if I'm just working on my own in the house, I'll be like, right, how well do I feel? Oh, I'll just put one lamp on today because I can only be bothered to do one print at a time. That's all right. Put my print on and then I can go and rest for like 30 minutes, have a nice cup of tea. I can really just slow it down, take it very easy in the house. But that also helps with like what I surmise is me touch of OCD, because I do feel I get anxious if I haven't made something, which is really, really strange. Nobody else I've talked to gets that. But if I haven't made something by the time I go to bed.
I completely understand that. One of the ways that I ended up going more into photography and moving away from the mainstream was because I started effectively using my camera as a therapist, as a coping mechanism. I don't do it quite as much, but I still get antsy if I don't pick up my therapist and use it every now and again. Jo, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Although next time I think we're going to have to get you on again, and we're going to have to get you to talk about your personal work, because even when I've asked you about your personal work here, you are constantly talking about other people and how this can benefit other people and everything. So next time I'm going to dial down that empathy and we're going to talk a bit more about you and your personal work. So if people have listened and they're intrigued and they're interested in what you are doing, where can they find out more about you, about your work, about your projects, etc.? Where can they go to find out more about you?
So your one-stop shop for Jo's stuff is my website, which is called maverickbeyond, all one word.com. And that'll link you to everything else, basically. So me Instagram, Twitter, it's not Twitter anymore, is it? X. And I've got a YouTube. I mean, a lot of my stuff, like my short films, tends to be just me making stuff in the house, like process-based work. But then there's a lot of teaching things as well. So if you want to get into doing cyanotype or photography, then there's stuff there to help you out.
You can find show notes for this episode, including Jo's details and links, over on our website, isthatreallyphotography.com. If you'd like some more Is That Really Photography in your life, don't forget to subscribe on the podcast forum of your choice. Love your social media? You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram and Threads. But most of all, don't forget to have some fun creating those images with light, in whichever form it is that you enjoy.